I'm on. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. Let me just quickly show two charts that tell you what is at stake in all of this, so far as many of us are concerned. First, and you're not going to be able to see it in detail, but you can see where this black bar is. This was 1992 NAEP's 8th grade math test. And this was the list of all the 50 states. This shows you, and it's about 1/4 of the way down, where Massachusetts was before the Education Reform Act was developed in '93, and then later we had both K-12 standards and teacher tests, which I'll say a little bit more about. But that's what that the black bar means. This is where we ended up in 2007 on the 8th grade math test, right at the very top, and by a considerable number, a margin. So that, again, these are all the states in the Union, and we had, as a result of all that was happening in classrooms and with the use of first-rate standards, we were now at the top. And all this, and this was 8th grade math, all this is now in jeopardy because of the adoption of Common Core's standards by the Board of Education. 2010, I was on the state board at that time. And it is in jeopardy because of the PARCC tests, which may be finally approved by the State Board of Education this year, even though a tentative decision has been made and broadcast through superintendents in the state that you're already going that route whether you like it or not. But it will lock in the Common Core standards with the PARCC tests, which are part of a group of, right now, about 12 states that will together determine the pass score or the cut score. And we don't know exactly where that's going to be yet. Now, what I'm going to do here in my 15 or so minutes of prepared remarks is talk a little bit about what my philosophy was when I was responsible for developing K-12 standards in every major subject when I was in the department from 1999 to 2003. I'm then going to talk a little bit about the problems with Common Core's English Language Arts standards compared to what we had, and why I did not sign off on Common Core's standards when I was on the Common Core Validation Committee in 2010. And then I will end up with my own suggestions on what I think you could do at this point, given the situation. Let me ask those of you who are here, how many of you had children in the schools before 2010? Most of you. Okay. So you would know from your children's experiences before 2010 a little bit about the standards that were in play then, because it was only from 2010 on that they gradually changed to the point where, as of this year, they probably are fully Common Core in the two major subjects, math and ELA, that the test will be based on. My philosophy was very straightforward in 1999 when I was hired to be a senior associate commissioner in the department. I wanted to make sure that we did something to improve all children's academic experiences, because we've had a 50-year decline in this country long before Common Core. It wasn't the cause of the decline, but it goes way back to the 1950s and 60s, and we needed to make sure that all kids were improving. So that was the goal major goal, the destination for the standards. We weren't trying to close gaps, we were trying to raise everybody. Secondly, we were focusing on knowledge, content knowledge, academic knowledge, because that is the basis for critical thinking. And third, and this is a related goal is only now beginning to receive some attention, I wanted to make sure that we strengthened our teacher corps, prospective teachers coming out of our education schools or other programs, and veteran teachers through professional development. Why? I was like controlling, the master controller, controlling all these planes taking off. We know through common sense that if you want teachers to teach to stronger standards, you have to have stronger teachers. That was the whole point. We had to do something to raise the academic level and qualifications of our teachers because we wanted them to be able to teach to stronger standards. So that was what led to K-12 standards in every major subject that were eventually judged to be among the best sets of standards in the country in every major subject, and was part of what was behind the rise of Bay State children to the very top in math and in reading as well. There weren't tests for other areas except science. We knew that 8th grade science, we were tied for first place with Singapore on an international test, which actually was very surprising to some of us because we had no idea that that document alone had been that successful with grade 8 students through the years because we had good standards all the way. That document too is going away this year, and that's another problem that needs to be addressed and talked about. What are the problems with Common Core's ELA standards? You may or may not have a one-pager that was available at the back of the room. You can get it later if you don't have it now. I put first what are missing standards in Common Core. They're missing in Common Core, but they weren't missing in the Massachusetts standards. So even though there is a common refrain by Common Core proponents that they were building on the Massachusetts standards or they're really very similar, this is not the case. There was no standard on the history of the English language. That's really what ELA is going to be about, through the study of the good literature that has been written in English language. So that is number 2. There was no standard on British literature. The authors that are those authors that have contributed to the development of the English language that we quote all the time, all they have as a requirement is the study of one Shakespeare play. I'm sorry, should that be? Oh.
Speaking of plays, you can just get rid of it.
Oh, all right, I've got to get closer. All right, in this, sorry. So we have, because one of the, I should say, the major focus of the original K-12 Massachusetts standards was literary study. Why literary study? Because listening to English teachers, and from my own background in reading research, we knew that it was the focus on imaginative literature that would develop children's imaginations and their understanding of the English language. That is part of what we want them to gather and develop as they go through the grades and graduate from an English-speaking high school. So we wanted that focus on literary study, and Common Core ends up with the opposite focus on informational text. There were also, and this is number 3, in Common Core, there are no standards on authors from the ancient world, especially classical Greece and Rome. What does that mean? And I give you an example in section 3, if you have that page in front of you. One of the standards, and if your child was in grade 9 or 10, you would have known about it. And it was one of the best standards we had. It was put there by English teachers in Massachusetts, not by me. Standard read, analyze the character, structure, and themes of classical Greek drama and epic poetry. Sounds esoteric, but what is it referring to? It's referring to the Iliad, the Odyssey, and the Aeneid. What most grade 9 or 10 English teachers have taught in Massachusetts schools for generations. And I knew that because I grew up in Bridgewater. I'm from the South Shore. So I went to a small town high school in Massachusetts. And yes, What I had for an English curriculum from 9 to 12 in Bridgewater High School, most parents today would be thrilled to have their children have today. It was common then. Today it's hard to find. But that was the kind of standard that represented rich content, and it also reflected the level of reading difficulty that you wanted kids to have in high school. This was a major push, as I said, for all kids. We wanted at the high school level for kids to read high school level reading material. Common sense. If you're going to be prepared for college or career or self-government, town meeting, whatever, you need to be able to read at the high school level those kinds of works that are written for mature adults by the time you graduate from high school. That's the point of the high school English classes. So those were part of the goals, and the absence of these kinds of standards were a good part of the problem with Common Core. I list them all, the overall deficits, in a little bit more detail in a different way, but you can read through this page on your own, and this was why I would not sign off. In 2010, I was part of the Common Core Validation Committee. It was a very bizarre committee. There were less than 30 of us, and we were charged with making sure that Common Core standards were internationally benchmarked, research-based, and rigorous, among other things. Professor Milgram from Stanford, who was the only mathematician on this committee, refused to sign off. I was the only English language standards expert. I refused to sign off, and 3 other people did too. Why the other people did sign off, but they weren't experts in either math and English, they would have to answer for themselves. But this was the beginning of the problem for me. These standards were not comparable to the best out there, never mind being comparable to the best outside of this country as well as the best inside this country. So there are many problems with the standards, and if you read section 3, gotta remember to speak closer to this, you will see an example of a poorly constructed standard, in my judgment, and I kept sending in suggestions and they went nowhere. This was another part of our whole problem. It was a totally non-transparent process being on this validation committee. We kept asking for the research, we kept sending in suggestions, nothing happened, and we never knew what happened behind the curtain. There was a wizard there. The wizard might have been 3 people, 4 people, we don't know, but we never had a chance to find out who are these wizards behind this green curtain. I'm thinking of the Wizard of Oz now, this wonderful movie. Who would be able to be unmasked so that we knew who to speak to get the changes in these documents? Professor Milgram was able, as a mathematician, and he's told this story because we speak on a public speaking circuit tour all the time. We've gone to many states together. He will say that he managed to get college readiness bumped up from Algebra 1 up to weak Algebra 2. That still isn't college readiness for anyone who understands what you need to go to college. You've got to be prepared at least for beyond trigonometry for calculus. If you're going to go into the STEM area, you should have had calculus. But the point was, he was able to bump up, because he was a mathematician, speaking to the people who were the standards writers in math, that you could get from at least Algebra 1 up to Algebra 2, which is a weak Algebra 2 in Common Core, as part of college readiness. Now, what does that buy you? It's harder to tell in English, and I will explain why in a minute. But college readiness in the grade 11 test, and I don't know if you've had it here in Gloucester yet. Does anyone know whether the grade 11 students were given the PARCC test, college readiness? No. Okay. But that's coming, because that is what Smarter Balance, the other one, is now doing in the rest of the country, and it will be here next year, if not this year. We've had grade 10 MCAS, which determines high school diploma. But grade 11 is to be the college readiness test for both PARCC, Smart Balance, or any other Common Core-based test. And if you pass it, you are then to be able to take 4-credit, four-credit courses in your college freshman year without placement tests to determine what you need. And in math, this is critical. So we have some problems coming up. This is just the beginning. This is a work in progress. We don't know what's going to happen. But Common Core's college readiness test doesn't even meet the admission requirements of most community colleges, never mind four-year colleges throughout the country, not just in Massachusetts. Why is it harder in English to know? Because you've got to see the passages. And until you can see the passages, the reading passages, and know where the pass or cut score is, you don't know how hard the test is. Second problem is that you'll never see the reading passages because, unlike MCAS, they're not going to be released. This has been one of the great virtues of MCAS. How many of you remember ever looking to see, every year they have to be released by law, how many of you remember looking, as your kids went through, at test items? They were always made available on the web. You're not going to find them for PARCC. You may find a few sample items, but you will have no idea if they've been cherry-picked, how representative they are. We just don't know. Whereas for MCAS, the statute read that the entire set of items has to be released every year. And teachers found them very useful, as well as parents, because then they could see what their kids were being graded on. But you're not going to know that because your kid is taking a test on a computer. And you won't be able to see what those passages on the computer are like. And we don't even know where they're coming from, because I have written regularly and asked Jed Nelhouse, who used to be in the department there, so I knew him, who is now head of assessment for PARCC, where are they getting passages from? We don't know yet. Hasn't been decided. It's not part of test specifications, so we don't know what's going to happen. That's only one of the problems with going with PARCC as opposed to MCAS. The second major one, and I participated in one of these meetings so I understand it a little bit better, is who sets the pass score? With MCAS, remember this is a Massachusetts-based test. You had people from Massachusetts, state reps, teachers, businessmen, parents, whatever. They were part of the committee that decided what the pass score would be. With PARCC, the pass score is going to be decided by whoever is part of this 12-state consortium. And it's not clear to me yet who these people are to decide the pass scores, but it certainly won't be Massachusetts-based. It will include people from all the other states that are part of our consortium. That's part of the game. If you're going to have the same test given to 12 different states, then it has to be a common pass score. Even though, as in even last year, many states were asking for a state-related pass score. But you see, that would contradict the whole point of having a common set of standards if you have different pass scores in different states. So they've had to argue and wrestle about that one, and I still don't know where they're getting the pass score from, who is determining it, and how valid that will be, whether it will ever be changed or not, because we know there's no mechanism for even revising PARCC or the Common Core standards themselves. They've been, for some reason, set in stone, unlike your Massachusetts standards, which had to be revised every 6 or 7 years by state law. So you've got all kinds of major, profound differences between your MCAS and your PARCC tests. And no one understands those differences because it's too early in the day to understand them. In other words, things haven't played out long enough. It's still a work in progress, and we don't know what's going to happen. Except that you have a commissioner who is chairman of the governing board for PARCC, who will want to recommend what he's chairman of the governing board for. Can he not recommend what he's chairman of the governing board for? And you've got pressure from the federal government, which claims this is a state-led initiative, not a federal initiative, even though Secretary of Education Duncan is very upset with the opt-outs. And that will get me to my last point, spend another few minutes on what can people do while they explore further the situation with the difference between a test that's controlled by people in Massachusetts for Massachusetts kids, which was what we had under No Child Left Behind, and a test that is common to 12 states that include states like Mississippi and Arkansas, which want to raise, but Massachusetts wants to keep what was higher to begin with. So how are they going to make a compromise? We don't know. We don't really know. First of all, one of the things that is now just beginning to happen, make sure I speak to this, is to put a question on the ballot for local elections or in a town meeting. Now, Gloucester's a city, so you probably would have a ballot. You don't have an open town meeting. I understand that. You're not a town. I came from an open town meeting. I live in a representative town meeting. And you could do this at a town meeting, but you can also put a question on the ballot that is a non-binding resolution that allows parents and others the opportunity to express their opinion. That's all it does. And it would be, do you want the state legislature to defund Common Core's technology requirements? Do you want the state legislature to do X, Y, or Z? There are a number of different examples. There are towns, and I'll list a few of them, that just voted this past week on their questions. They were on the ballot. Halifax, Whitman, Hanson, Lakeville. There are a number of small towns in southeast Massachusetts just this past week. Your newspapers are going to tell you about it. The Globe is not reporting on it. But we have the information, and I've been collecting the questions on the ballot. Part of our problem is that the media isn't reporting on this either. But I'm collecting those questions. Now, I was told by someone in Lakeville who's really doing an extensive job. Her first name is Sarah, and she's got a last name of 4 syllables, and I keep mispronouncing it. So I'm not going to pronounce it right now and do it wrong. But she says that when she looked into the statutes for Massachusetts, that if you get X percentage, 10% of registered voters in a particular city or town, automatically your petition can go on the ballot. It doesn't need to be approved by city council or by your selectmen or school committee. Now that would have to be checked because there might be changes in each town or city's own bylaws. But as far as Massachusetts statute is concerned, petitions can go right on, and that's what happened in Lakeville. You know, that's near Rentham, down southeast Massachusetts. But there are several more. Tewksbury passed something last year, a question that was not probably the best worded. They did get help from their legal counsel, but I think they needed more help from a grammarian, so that's a different issue. But there are, you have to look at these questions to see how easily they read, and you want them to request something of your state legislators. There's got to be an audience for a petition or an audience for a question on the ballot. So that's one way. The second is that has been mentioned. Opt your kids out of the PARCC tests. You have the right to do so. 400 years, whether you're before this country was established, whether you were a colony or a territory, every parent has had the right to keep their child from a school activity they didn't want their child to participate in. Parents' rights. Other countries have different laws, but in this country, parents can keep their kids home. They don't like the field trip. They don't like what's happening in school, whatever they do. They don't need to ask permission. They don't need to have a right given to them that they already have. You can homeschool your kids. These rights have always existed. So you can opt out. And the point of opting out is that what we have been told by psychometricians is that if less than 95% of the children at a particular grade level don't take the test, the results are invalid. You've got to get over 95%. New York State has had thousands of opt-outs. New Jersey has had teachers' union telling parents, opt your kids out. It's happening. Idaho just had one district that was reported where over half of the junior class opted out, and they're now having a fight at the State Department of Ed in the governor's office about it. So you have to understand things are happening across the country that you may not be reading about. And then finally, as Jamie said, write your own complaint letters to your legislators, state senators, or state reps. Let them know. They've got to hear from you. After all, there's no such thing as a Republican set of pre-calculus standards or a Democratic set of pre-calculus standards. What's missing are pre-calculus standards. So you want them in. It's not a party issue. It's an academic issue. And that's what you have to back up whatever you say with information. And I'm going to stop here because I think you need to be able to ask your own questions for us. Thank you very much.